good.
Somebody describe this picture to me. To us.
It's dirty.
It's dirty. Okay, it's dirty. Or is it dirty business?
Deut said despair.
Despair or
Despair.
Fury. Look at that. The guy's sitting there in just a total mud mess. They had to dig so many trenches across France, I think it was. It was just one trench after another, after another, after another.
Yeah, but
War
that's
is-
a dead horse up there in the drainage.
Dead horse. There's
Oh, yeah.
Did y'all see War Horse? That was a good movie. If you ever get a chance to like war movies. Yeah, everything is turned over. This guy's probably, it's just a mess. It's just a mess. So Israel is supposed to be holy by avoiding what's impure, not by human standards, but by divine standards. And that's what we need to be getting into our spirits. God has some standards for us to uphold. And man's natural condition is we're at enmity with God. And that word means what, Tina? Enmity. Does it mean war? War? Yeah, things are not settled until. So how can we be not at war with God, not at enmity with God? What's the solution?
Be at peace.
Be at peace with Him, and what's the peace? Or who's the peace?
Yeah.
Peace isn't a what, it's a who,
Following
right?
His word.
Following His word, yes. And Yeshua, yes, right, and Yeshua is the peace, right?
Turn our hearts to Him.
Right, and God, that's His peace treaty. He comes after us suing for peace. You know, and if He sues for peace and we accept His terms of peace, then we're gonna do things His way, right? And it doesn't sound like it's that hard, right? Okay, so last week we kind of ended on quickly on this. We aren't going to spend a lot of time because a lot of you know about this already, but it's called the Shemitah, or Yah's release. And in His terms of a peace treaty with us, this is part of His terms and conditions to have peace. Okay, Shemitah. It's a funny word. Oh, can somebody explain to me what Shemitah, or explain to us what Shemitah is? How long? It's a period of time, and how long a period of time is it? 7 years, right? Okay. And at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant release of debts. Wow. Your neighbor, your brother, forgive the debt. A foreigner still pays. If he's a foreigner, he still pays. But if he's your neighbor or your brother, you're supposed to forgive that debt. So Yah will bless you in your inheritance, and you will be a lender to many nations, but they shall not be over you. That's all part of the peace plan with God. Okay? So if that was true back then in the covenant, that's probably going to be true after Yeshua comes back for a period of time. I would imagine. Right?
After we get behind Him.
After we get behind Him. Okay. All right, so I just want you to know that because we're going to be talking about that Shemitah situation here a little bit. We'll explore that a little bit later in this morning's talk. But so Deuteronomy 15:7 through 16:12 is what we're going to be covering today. Steve, do you have your magic box open there? Okay.
So what is it?
Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy 15.
Deuteronomy 15.
15. And if you would read 7 through 11, that would probably be really good. Be aware to help the poor in your midst. Don't manipulate God's system. Give from a generous heart and an open hand. So if you, yeah.
If anyone is poor among you, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The seventh year, the year for canceling debts is near. Oh no, what am I going to do? Well, no, that was Advent. So that you do not show ill toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land.
Okay, so that whole concept of Shemitah, because God thinks in terms of sevens. Okay, we don't think in terms of seven. That's not natural. We think in terms of 10, maybe a dozen. We all know what a dozen is, right? But he thinks in terms of seven. And then he thinks in terms of 7 sevens. Seven. That shouldn't be 7 week. We think it's 7 days in a week, right? And 7 sevens. But so every 7 years, there's a kind of a start over. Okay, so think in terms of, this is 7. 7, okay? And you're supposed to lend to somebody if he needs, can you lend me, Gina, can you lend me $100 until the Shemitah?
Sure.
Can you lend me $1,000 to the Shemitah because I'm poor and I need $1,000?
Now we don't know.
But it's the first year of the Shemitah. Y'all got 7 years to pay it back. That wouldn't be so bad, would it?
Well, that's good.
Okay, now, watch your attitude change, right? It's now 6 years and 6 months, and the Shemitah is coming in 6 months. Tina, can you lend me $1,000?
As soon as you pay me back the first 1,000.
You see that? Can you see
That's
how
good,
the
Gina.
Can you see how the attitude changed a little bit? Okay, so the first year, in a Shemitah cycle, it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe, borrow, you probably, you know me, and we know each other, I'll pay you back, right?
Right.
1,000. But 6 months, 6 years and 6 months into the thing is kind of a little different story, a little different reaction. But God says it shouldn't be a different reaction to your brother and to your neighbor, right? I don't mean a crazy neighbor, but all these things start falling into, but that's the attitude we have. He's freely given us, so we should be able to freely give to somebody else, give to others, right? I mean, that's kind of the, and that way, watch how, you ever see a guy, I love to watch guys juggle, especially when they're, anyway, I'm happy with baseballs, but when it gets to be watermelons or something like that, it's really cool watching all that stuff. But if we do that, that's how things work. If we can see that, okay? Because why? Because God's going, wow, you're doing what I've asked you to do. There's a blessing. There's a blessing that comes with all this stuff, right?
When does that start? Or we're not there yet?
I think it's depend upon birthday. So my year will be next year. I will be 56, so he's my 7th year.
Yeah. Well, I think that could be. I think on God's time, I think his whole calendar is set up. Is all set up on 7s. Mm-hmm. We'll have individual ones too, probably more than likely. But I think God's calendar time is it, and I think we're in the midst. I think we're almost at the end of a Jubilee year, so we're at the end of the 7. We'll get into that in a little bit. Steve goes, all right, that's all right. We'll get there.
Susan, can I ask a question
Please.
about this? Because I see here it says about your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and it be sin in you. So you shall give freely to your brother. So I think we need to define what is brother.
Yeah, who's my brother?
Just because, early in my business, I was so very generous to the poor, and the end of the month came, and the landlord seemed to want rent. And
Fancy that.
and saying, oh, sorry, I have no cash, I gave my whole month to the poor, that kind of didn't fly so well, so.
Yeah. Well, keeping in mind as we're budgeting money, do you remember last week or a couple weeks ago we started talking, was it last week, we started talking about how there's 3 different kinds of tithes. One goes to the Lord and one goes to yourself to go someplace and have a good time. And every 3rd year, and here's where the cycle comes in, it's a set cycle. So the 3rd year, the 7, okay? In the 3rd year of the 7 cycle, there's another tithe that you give to the poor, okay? And then in the 7th year, there's another tithe that is given to the poor, okay? So,
Thanks for reminding me.
yeah, so years 1 and 2, you live on 80% of your gross, let's just say it that way, because 10% of your stuff went to you anyway, right? 10% went to the Lord. And then in year 3, you live on 70%, because 10% went to the Lord, 10% went to yourself, and 10% goes to the poor. Okay, that happens in year 3. Year 4, once again, you're at 10% to the Lord and 10% to you. In year 5, you're 10% to the Lord and 10% to you. In year 6, you're back to 10% to the Lord, 10% to you, and 10% to the poor. Okay, and then you get to year 7. And if people were to get into a cycle like that, that makes the bicycle, the pedals on the bicycle go round and round and round and round, and that's how the world works, but we don't necessarily work like that. But if we were, so who's your neighbor? Or who's your brother?
Fellow follower of the Torah.
Fellow follower of Torah, right? Yeah.
Well, Jesus said in the Good Samaritan, who is your neighbor?
Yeah. What did he say?
He said, Jesus says, so which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the guy said, he who showed mercy on him. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise.
So mercy is a big commodity in God's kingdom. Let's just put it that way. Okay. All right.
I think the Lord has a way of letting us know who He wants us to know. Sometimes He had
Sure.
dropped it in my heart, give this much to this person.
Right.
And it's like, wow.
It's
okay.
not everybody that's standing out there on the corner with the,
Right.
with the thing. But if he tells you to do that when you're going by, then by golly, you better do it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's that kind of thing. So we have to have our ears on so we can hear. You shall open your hand wide to him who and willingly lend him sufficient funds for whatever his need is. There's got to be a need there, not just because that sounds like a good idea. And he's telling you, lest your eye be evil against your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to Yahweh, Yahweh against you, and then it becomes a sin. So if he tells you to do something and you don't do it, then now all of a sudden now you're into a problem. Okay?
So, excuse me, is the 3rd and the 7th year that are the same?
3rd year and the 6th year.
3rd and 6th. Oh.
3rd year and 6th year. And then the 7th year comes here, and then all the debts that somebody owes you over that last 7 years, they all go in there. Do you know that in this country, up until World War II, after World War II, you couldn't get a house loan for more than 7 years? It was 7 years and your house was paid off.
Wow.
And then after World War II, FHA came along, and VA, and all these, and then 1990, the ARMS, adjustable rate, anyway, boom, and all of a sudden, bankers thought, boy, we could make a lot more money if we have amortized loans, and we'll just charge interest on top of right?
Compound interest. is a
Compound interest.
Magic thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
7th wonder of the world, or something like that.
That's what they know.
Okay. All right, so God considers it to be wicked, to be evil ethically, to have an evil eye. And to have an evil eye is a Hebrew idiom meaning to be stingy. Somebody tell me what 6:22 says in Matthew.
The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light.
Okay.
But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?
Yeah, oh yeah, so we don't want to be full of darkness, we want to be full of light. And we should be known as generous people, right? Right. Okay. Good eye is to be generous. Okay, so who is my brother? The poor, he said in 12:46-50, he says, the poor is always going to be with you, so open your hand wide to your brother. To your brother. Whosoever does the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. That's what Yeshua said. Okay? Right. Family. Yeah. So, where's our family? We must remember where all the family of Jacob went. think about this for a minute. Where did Jacob's family go? Here we go. This guy's down here looking for him. It's a lot later. He's got a beard. He says, "Is Israel?" They got pushed up into Turkey, up into the Caucasus area, and as Israel left the Caucasus Mountains, and migrated into Europe and into North America, there they became known as Caucasians.
Oh, that's us.
Who in here is a Caucasian? We're all Caucasians. We're Caucasian. Okay?
Some of the tribes.
Some of the tribes did. Some of the tribes,
Oh,
a lot of the 10 northern tribes, that's mostly where they went. A lot of the southern tribes, those of you who might be of Hispanic, have Spain in you somewhere, that was from Judah, and a lot of Judah went off to Spain. And then from Spain, they went off to South America, they went to different places. So you guys we have some people that have some Spain in them, you're probably Judah. Okay? I'm Dutch,
You're in a world of your own.
I'm in a world of my own. I'm Dutch and Swedish, so. But you guys, we're all Caucasians, right? We're all Caucasians. Caucasians or what? What are the other boxes that we even? I don't get past the Caucasian one, so I don't know. If I'm checking a box on a form, Black, Asian, Caucasian, right? Okay, there you go.
And they have a weird one I've never understood. I think it's Mongol or Mongolian or something.
Mongolian?
That's Asian.
That's Asian.
That's Asian.
I know, but they have that separate box is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
yeah.
Oh, they have really? They have their own box?
Yeah.
Okay, well, whatever. Well, good for them. Okay.
And their own little.
So this is what happens on the 7th year. So every 7th year, there was supposed to be the land would rest. Listen, this is really cool. The land would rest. If the land would rest, that means the farmers didn't have to do anything. Huh.
But they don't get paid.
Oh, but they didn't need to be because if they were being obedient, there was plenty enough there to eat in the crop.
Right.
God took care of them. It was amazing. There would be plenty enough crop there in the 6th year where they had to take another tithe, and there would just be a bounty of stuff happening. It was an amazing system. Because our God's amazing. I don't know how to say that. Can I say it bigger than that?
You could use all caps.
You could use all caps and gold with exclamation points, but the remission of debt, cease of labor can either be a blessing. So let me ask you a question. When Yeshua started his ministry, do you suppose it might have been the end of one of those Shemitah years? Because he had crowds following him all around. Oh, think about it. He had, and that's exactly what they would do. They didn't have anything else to do. They didn't have, they couldn't buy tickets to concerts. Yeah, and they didn't have anything else to do, so the rabbis would start traveling around and they would be teaching stuff from the Bible. That's exactly what Yeshua did. And the crowds he just gathered crowds like a rolling stone gathers moss because people were interested in what he was saying. Nobody ever taught like him before. And besides that, he was feeding them. Fish and bread, right?
They'll find their good reason to follow.
Another good reason to follow him, he will feed you. I mean, stop and think about it. By the time he got up to Jerusalem, the guy was a rock star. Literally. Multitudes. The Bible says multitudes were following him, right? They wanted to hear what he had to say. The people of the land, now these are the people of the land. These are the Jewish people of Judah, the Jewish people, the people of the land. They were looking for the Messiah. Remember last week we talked about this? The Jews, the leadership up at the Temple Mount, who had territory to protect, they didn't so much like him, did they?
He was slamming all their rules and all their.
He was slamming doors in their faces, right? But and he was deliberately crossing some of these fences that these guys up at the Temple Mount had been building around everything. All these fences. Let's build a fence around the Torah. Now you can't you can't do this and you can't do that, you can't pick up your mat on Sabbath. What do you think you're doing picking up your mat on Sabbath? What do you think you're healing that guy on Sabbath? What you're doing draining off out of the fields on the Sabbath? What do you think? He was busting with fences because he never wanted to give them. Anyway, okay. This is what I want. Okay, here's what I want to get. Shemitah every 7th year. We're just American. 73, my daughter was born. Okay, that was a Shemitah year. 80, is that 7 years later? That was a Shemitah year. 87, 94, 2001, 2008, 2015. Almost all the greatest crashes of the stock market happened in a Shemitah year. Is that a coincidence? Or is that God's word being applied? Does it have to be that way? But there's going to be some kind of a release of debt or some kind of judgment happen one way or the other. Okay? Here we go. 2015 and 16, that's our latest one. The stock market sell-off, instigated by global financial events, began in the United States on August 18, 2015.
3 years ago, you think?
Yep, there you go. It is. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
When the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 33 points, that's not so bad, and gathered a downward momentum over several days, which became a steep sell-off on August 21st, 2015, falling 531 points. That was a big deal back in 2015 on that day. It was the worst year for making money since the Great Depression, 2015. What if this is true, and it is, when's the next
2022.
2022.
So how is
my
that?
money out on the 2021?
How is that a release of debt?
Well, something's going to happen. Release of debt. I don't know. I'm just saying it's a Shemitah year.
Well, no, I understand that.
How does
but
it
it's-
release of debt? One way or the other? I don't know.
I don't,
Yeah, it just seems
'Cause-
like a lot of investments, plummeted right
Yeah.
then, and
the companies didn't owe us the money,
Okay.
but that ain't
Well,
right.
I have a bigger question than that, Bill.
Okay, lay it on me. I'll make up an answer.
Oh, watch out.
Well, it's gonna be a long one, she said that.
Yeah.
If 2015 was, because we've been saying, well, 2017 was the Jubilee year, which had to be a
Mhm.
Shemitah year.
Mhm.
And then we said, well, it was 2018 was the Shemitah year, but we're not in a, if 2015 was a Shemitah year, and all those other years were Shemitah years, then the Jubilee year has to be a Shemitah year too, right?
Mhm.
Also has to be a 7th year, 7.
So 22, yeah.
it's
Or is
the
it the
next
50?
year.
It's the next year.
Jubilee is
Yeah.
the next year.
Yeah, that's the thing that bothered me last night. I went,
Yeah.
uh-oh, what does that do to our Lord calculations?
Well, in a way, we can't really figure it out anymore, because what was going on in the Torah time, between then and now, the calendar's been so scrambled up and then so ignored and so changed, and this has been added and that's been taken away and then. So maybe in a way, there's no way for us to really tell when the Shemitah years really are. I mean, we can see a pattern here.
Yeah.
I would think
This
Michael Root
is
got it.
this is
Yeah.
Joshua.
Yeah.
What's the guy's name?
John.
Michael Root.
Michael
John-
Root.
Michael
John-
Root. Well, Michael Root, he's gone way back
Yeah.
several times with the moon, because with computers now, they can tell what the solar system was doing back then, so.
That's true.
He's brought it to future date where I think it would be correct, and then there's Jonathan Kahn, who's written the books on Harvard
Yeah.
and the Shemitah.
In the
So he
Shemitah.
looks at this in depth.
Yeah.
But it doesn't agree with the Jubilee year. I mean, if you look at 1960, see, that's what I mean. If you look at 1967, when Jerusalem was restored to Judah, if that wasn't a Jubilee year, I'll eat my hat. I mean, that was huge. To even think Jerusalem existed, let alone was handed back to Judah.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to
So
be a Jubilee
we have
year.
Steve and Maria down there going, there's at least Steve going, what is a Jubilee year? Would you please tell me what a Jubilee year is?
It's like a huge Shemitah.
Seven, so if God counts things in groups of seven, okay, and we had 7 sevens, seven, so 7 times 7 would be 49 years, so, and then the next year, which would be the first year, is also the 50th year.
Yeah.
Okay, this year?
It's just the way he does it, because 7. Okay, 7, so there's 7 sevens and 49, after 49 years, there's gonna be a jubilee, and that's the 50th year.
Okay.
And good things
Good
happen.
things happen, good things
I
happen.
thought,
Well,
Then
if
next
you're on-
year?
If you're on God's team, good things happen.
I thought the year of Jubilee is when the debts were released. I thought the Shemitah year is not I thought the Shemitah year was the 7th year or the Sabbath year that is just prior to the year of Jubilee. It's
No,
not-
every 7th year is a Shemitah year. And if you've lent money to your brother or whatever, then those debts are supposed to be released. In the Jubilee year, everything is returned to its original owner. That's why Myra was saying Jerusalem was returned to Judah in 1967. And now and then here we are 50 years later, right? Is that right?
I think so.
That was last year.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was last year.
Right, and a jubilee, according to the Bible, always starts on Yom Kippur. So it would have started last Yom Kippur. That's what we're thinking. A lot of people think it, not just us. Last Yom Kippur, which is in the fall, and would last for a year. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been returned. Is being returned.
So we're back in the first year of Sabbath.
Well, we're not to Yom Kippur yet, but we will be in the fall. Yeah,
That's what I mean.
yeah. We'll be back in the first year of.
Start over again.
Yeah. Does that make crazy sense? Does that make crazy sense? She was going, what?
No, I'm just,
No.
I'm kind of curious if you think that.
Yeah, it's a
No,
lot of numbers.
No, I know.
There's a lot of number, and it's
Yeah.
okay. You don't have to understand it. We'll
Yeah.
readdress it again.
But if you have a nation of priests, which is what God wanted, right?
Yep.
And the Torah is in full force, and everybody's on the same page, then it works. Right?
Right.
But if you have everybody scrambled all over the world and, there's no way to, I mean, we can have an open hand and live like we're in the Jubilee all the time. I mean, we can always be kind to each other and return stuff. But as far as making it work worldwide or nationwide or Loveland-wide or anything, it won't work because we've got so many people that are scattered in all
And I run the
different directions, so
Right.
when Jesus returns, I think it will work. I mean, it'll work all the time, because his word never.
His word works all the time anyway, and if we're not keeping it, then there's judgment that happens. Just natural stuff's gonna happen if we don't keep it. Israel never kept the Jubilee year.
They never kept.
They never kept it. One reason why they got kicked out of the country, they went off to Babylon, you didn't, okay, go ahead, your land's gonna rest for every 1 year for every year you didn't let it rest.
See, Daniel, can I say one more?
Please.
Daniel verifies that, because when in Daniel 9, when he says, here's the timeline, Daniel, this is exactly when Messiah will come. There will be 7 years, and then 63 years. Well, those 7 years are the Jubilee hunk. And he said, in that 7 years, on the 50th year, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. So you have 49 years to rebuild Jerusalem. On the 50th year is Jubilee year, and it's rebuilt. And that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly what happened, history-wise. That verifies it.
Anyways.
Susan,
Yes.
say one thing.
Yes.
Here's the microphone.
I think it was from Jonathan Kahn that who spoke about the reason why the stock market crashes relates to judgment, in that people are not forgiving the debts on the seventh. That's why the stock
That's
market
why-
crash
Yeah.
judgment comes.
Judgment happens, yeah, we either go with the program, like what you were just saying, and then it works, or we don't, and then judgment comes, and then it hurts, and then it looks like a stock market crash. Does that make sense?
Debts become so high that people can't pay them, and
Yeah.
then their businesses crash in some
Right.
form.
Or countries crash, and keep that in mind here for just a minute, Joel.
They stop investing, so then the value drops,
States,
right? They stop investing because they don't have any left.
right.
Then it drops. Then the drop triggers the other drop, which was what, 25 times greater or something.
Yeah.
So it's a triggering of debt piling up because you didn't forgive.
It's just,
is what it sounds like.
this is, so if we could just say, this is the way the universe works,
Uh-huh.
and if we, and if we can go against it, but then these natural, it's not like God's going, well, okay, boy, I'm gonna get you today. It's just, these are the natural things that follow if we don't do it the right
Yeah,
way.
it still follows his own law, his own pattern.
Yeah. Right, just
Whether
like
we do
today.
or not.
Right, just like today, we could be standing in his line or not. It's our choice, right? And if we're not standing in his line, then things are gonna happen. So we wanna be standing in his line.
It's just the natural flow of things.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether we do or not.
Right. Okay. Now we're gonna talk, for just a minute, we're gonna talk about towers and tall buildings and centers of power and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing when we think of tower, we think of the Tower of Babel. I mean, so this is old. This is an old concept. This is nothing new. And in Europe, tall buildings meant power. Just like at the Tower of Babel meant power. That's why they wanted, And in America, in 1870, America builds the tallest building, and guess what? Power, world power, started shifting to the United States.
What building was that?
The Sears Tower.
Sears Tower.
Sears Tower, yeah.
Chicago.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, that's in Chicago.
No, it wasn't the Empire State Building.
Sears Tower.
Well, it should have been the Empire State Building.
I watched the Sears Tower being built.
1870.
Major, yes I did.
Oh.
You what?
I said I watched the Sears Tower being built.
So it wasn't a Sears Tower. Oh,
That's in
what
Chicago.
You are old.
I forget. I looked it up and it didn't mean anything to me, so I didn't retain it. But but anyway,
I'll Google it.
Okay, this information came from Glenn Beck, who was my famous history teacher several years ago. Anyway, listen to this. 1945. It's the end of World War II, right? They had plans to build the Trade Center in New York City, and we also had Hiroshima. Okay, watch. That was the plans. 1966, the World Trade Center begins construction. Okay, 1973. Do you remember that as being that was the first year of the Shemitah with the stock market crash? World Trade Center is finished, and abortion is also legalized. We have Hiroshima and abortion legalized, and America loses the Vietnam War all 1973. Loses the war, whatever, have an end of the war. Okay, all right, just kind of keep that in mind. Now here's our Empire State Building. I just thought this was magnificent. In the midst of the Depression, okay, they built the Empire State Building. Construction began on March 17th, 1930. And it opened on May 31st, 1931.
Holy smoly.
They built this thing so fast, they built 1 floor per day.
Wow.
Did you know that?
How did they do that?
They hired because
Working on it.
You were working on it.
the Empire State Building stood as the world's tallest building because we were America. We were coming up in the world, right?
That's
Nearly 40
amazing.
years until the completion of the World Trade Center in the North Tower in Lower Manhattan in the late 1970s. Isn't that amazing?
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. It gets more amazing. 1 floor per day.
Yeah,
That's
One floor-
amazing.
It takes a year and a half to build a 2,000 square foot house now.
I have a tiny factoid, and I don't even know if it's true,
Okay.
but I took care of a man who said that he was an engineer on the Empire State Building, and he maintains that the foundation is made with wood, that it's wood piled in there, and it's the pressure of the building. I said, how could it have a wooden foundation? But his name was
Wow.
Mr. Brock.
Wow.
I don't know.
It's true or
They
not,
might-
anyways.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
They might have had timbers stacked you know,
Something.
heavily together, not
There's
like,
not another piece of real estate that can hold the weight and the pressure of these buildings on Manhattan, because it has something to do with a granite foundation. It's a big granite rock. Anyway.
plus a typical building, I think the figure is like, it's about another 30% lower than the ground level, is all that's holding up the top. The top, you know, 100% you see there's another 30-something% actually down there is just all foundation.
Kind of like roots on a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Piece of trivia.
Yes, sir. I love trivia.
The bridge, the Oakland Bay Bridge in California, not the Golden Gate, the Oakland Bay Bridge. The center support beam is as much area as the Empire State Building below water.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
How'd you know that?
That's amazing.
Because I lived in San Francisco.
You wanna know, what's on that bridge?
I did. That's how much concrete there is. It's the same volume as the Empire State Building.
Gosh.
Below
that's
water.
Below.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. Thank you. Okay, so Shemitahs and crashes. World Trade Towers come down in 2001, right?
7 years.
2008, the World Trade Center began rebuilding. In 2015, see, these are all Shemitah years. The World Trade
7
Center
years
is
apart.
completed. Okay, so just to remind you, here's the World Trade Centers. There they are, beautiful buildings, right? And there they were. We all know exactly right where we were when we saw that picture.
Yeah.
And here's the footprint of it in 2008.
Is it those two boxes?
Yep, that's where the old center, that's where the old towers were.
Okay.
And there's the new building that opened in 2015. And now watch this picture coming. See, my building's taller than your building because my mast tower is taller than, see?
Mm-hmm.
Now, China and Dubai, I think it is, have both built buildings that are taller than these guys. Or one is in Dubai,
Yeah.
because the world plays, can you top this?
Right,
You know,
right.
it's all about that. So that somehow, in men's minds, tall towers have to do with being in power, I guess. Go figure. I
You
mean,
wouldn't catch me up there.
I have a
you go to
picture.
change the light bulb?
Boy, the restaurant on top of there is
I don't
really-
care. I'm not going.
I wonder how many floors.
I looked and I don't remember.
212.
212?
No.
Cost $27 to go up to the top of it, that's all I know. Anyway.
112.
You have to pay me.
Yeah, 112.
So, question is, does America have a covenant with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh? And God says, I will bless you and your land and your descendants in honor, and you'll have world impact. And I will be your God, and the God of your descendants will be my people. That's what God says. And Abraham says, okay. Okay. I want you to look very carefully. George Washington made a covenant with God, with the God of the universe, saying, okay, ready? Since we ought to be no less persuaded that the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules and order and right which heaven itself has ordained, and since the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty, America, and the destination of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked on the experiment entrusted into the hands of the American people. America is an idea, and it's an experiment of not Republican Party, but letting someone else represent you, and you choosing who you're going to have represent you. Right? That's the whole idea.
To be a
But
republic.
To be a republic. But if we don't have the propitious, those guys were really, that's really fancy language, right?
Yeah.
we think in terms of ninth graders or seventh graders or something. So let's see if we can reduce this down a little bit. So we're an experiment. Just like Israel was an experiment. These people were an experiment. Can they follow the rules? We're an experiment. Can we do this? Can we be entrusted to govern ourselves from within, right?
I sent you an email of the picture of the world's tallest building.
Okay.
In case you want to go back to that.
Okay, I will. Thank you. All right. So let's turn this, Myra, would you turn this into simple English for us, please, and read this over here? This is George Washington. George
Washington.
Let George say, tell us.
Okay. In his address, Washington made it clear that no nation can expect to be blessed by God, propitious smiles of heaven, if they turn away from him, disregards the eternal rules of order and right.
That would be turning away from him, right?
Yep.
Disregarding his rules is turning away from him. Okay.
Yep. If a nation forgets God, she will lose the blessing that God has given her.
Does that not make sense? And is that not even fair?
Yeah, it's an if-then thing.
It's an if, yeah, it's an if-then thing. Okay, go ahead.
Washington made the promise that the United States of America would follow God. If she ever broke her promise, then she would lose God's blessing and protection. God would keep his promise. He always kept his promises. Only one question remained. Would the United States of America keep hers?
See, George Washington was speaking for the nation. You know, I mean, he's like, it sounds to me like he's a Moses kind of guy. Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then, I love this. Wait a minute, not that one, this one. And then, and then, wait a minute, wait just a cotton pick. I think we need a little bit of American history right this very minute, so this will make sense, okay? So, somebody light a candle and let's hear the word and see the truth. We might understand exactly what happened, okay? So let's light a candle. We don't have a candle light, but Bob cleaned up all my candles this morning. I forgot to put one out there for you. Is it got a battery?
It's not.
No, it's not flickering. Okay. All right.
I think we have some good light here.
We'll have some good light. Okay. We need a little, just a little American history. And to follow this through, I'm going to have Myra read it because she reads really well and she's close enough where she can see it. She's you're
Hold up my
there you go.
I was doing this to her and she wasn't noticing, you know?
Oh, okay.
She's too little.
Nice.
All right, let's see what happened here. We're going to look at this as what a nation does in relation to the rest of the world. Okay, America to the rest of the world and what happened. Okay.
We need a little history.
Yeah.
Right this very minute. Before World War I, foreigners invested more money in the United States than Americans invested in other countries, about $3 billion more. The war changed this. By 1919, Americans had almost $3 billion more invested in other countries than foreign citizens had invested in the United States. American foreign investments continued to increase greatly through the 1920s.
Okay.
Bob, don't.
This is information came from this guy. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Increased foreign investments was not the only sign of growing American economic power. By the end of World War I, the United States produced more goods and services than any other nation, both in total and per person.
It's interesting. I think about it. World War I. By when, Mara? By
the end of World War I.
By the end of World War I. So before World War I, we were just sitting over here. We had two ponds that separated us from the rest of the world, and we were just kind of clunking along, trying to get our country going, right? Okay. And all of us, and more people were invested here than we were over there, and by the end of World War I, that had all switched. Okay, so the 1920s roll along. Remember movies from the 1920s? America was the hottest market. We were hopping. You think the Charleston, all that stuff, remember? 1920s, America was
Tommy guns.
Tommy guns, yeah. The United States produced more goods and services than any other nation, both in total and per person. Okay, Mara, keep going.
Americans had more steel, food, cloth, and coal than even the richest foreign nations. In the 1920s, the United States national income was greater than the combined incomes of Britain and France and Germany, Japan, Canada, and 17 smaller countries.
America was becoming superpower, right?
Wow.
Okay, we're not done yet.
Quite simply, the United States had become the world's greatest economic power.
And we're still not done yet.
America's economic strength influenced its policies toward Europe toward the 1920s. In fact, one of the most important issues of this period was the economic aid the United States had provided European nations during World War I.
How many of you know it costs a lot of money to fight a war? Money, wars and money kind of go together. Okay, go ahead.
Americans lent the Allied countries $7 billion during the war. Shortly after the war, they lent another $3 billion.
Okay, and that's in 1920 dollars.
That's a lot of money.
That's not today dollars.
Other European allies borrowed most of the money for
Okay, our European allies, who were what? France
France and Britain.
Britain, I don't know who else. This is what they borrowed the money for.
Military equipment, food, and other needs of their people.
Okay, one more.
The Allied nations suffered far greater losses of property and population than the United States during the war. And when peace came, they called on the United States to cancel the loans America had made.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Can I just please borrow the $10 billion from you?
Wow.
Okay, let's see what the president said. Let's see, and the United States should not, so the Allies said, well, we needed the money. We didn't think, you're our brother. We didn't think we have to repay the money.
Didn't they sign
I don't know, but the rules say, what did we, remember? It gets kind of, anyway, let's see what happens.
France, Britain, and the other Allied nations said the United States should not expect them to repay the loans. The United States refused to cancel the debts. President Coolidge spoke for most Americans when he said simply, they borrowed the money.
Everybody say that. They borrowed the money. They owed the money, right? Okay.
He believed the European powers should pay back the war loans, even though their economies had suffered terribly during the fighting.
Let's just see how expensive this was. I found this chart last night. I just thought this was really interesting. The estimated cost for World War I.
Wow.
We don't read them all, but United States, $22 billion. Great Britain, $35 billion. France, $24 billion. Russia, $22 billion. Look at this. Japan, $40 million. I got Japan got involved in World War I. I don't know, but they must have been. India, $600. Look at this. Isn't this interesting? Germany, $37 billion. Austria, Hungary, they were on Germany's side, right? $20 billion.
World War I.
Canada, Australia, and those
That was not
those are
Nazis.
over $1 billion.
That
I
was
mean,
not
a
the
trillion.
Nazis.
No, not then.
No, that's
Was that
Confused
part of?
which one. Yeah.
1,000,000,000, oh, that's $1 billion. Jeez.
Also, and this is shocking. Myra, would you? This is big numbers.
Also, due to the high toll of death and injury, many villages lost all their skilled tradesmen, such as printers, smiths, and carpenters, trades that took a long time to learn. Because recovery required these skills, the infrastructures of the villages were crippled and ruined in many rural areas.
If you haven't got anybody that knows how to, buildings got all blown down, if you haven't got anybody that knows how to build another building, you told all the engineers, you know, it's gonna take, there's gonna be some lag time here, right?
Mm-hmm. I have to put an add on.
Things we never consider, right? Okay, so, at any rate, here's what happened. Go ahead.
Germany, after World War I, faced an insurmountable amount of domestic problems.
Germany did.
This is Germany.
Yep.
A collapsed economy, a starving population, an army that was just big enough to do nothing but stay idle. The Germans woke up with a national disaster with no solution in sight. When no hope and chaos descended, a war would be a solution, and in just 20 plus years later, the Treaty of Versailles had created another war.
You know why? You know what I found out? World War I never really ended. They had the Treaty of Versailles, but it was a armistice. I mean, it was just kind of a fancy ceasefire. Okay? And evidently, America decided we were not going to help Germany rebuild their infrastructure in their apartment buildings and their supermarkets and whatever. Because after all, they were terrible, no good, very bad people, and they hurt our country.
That was World War II.
That was, no, we're talking World War I.
Hmm.
But what this did was, 20 years later, it led into something that caused World War II. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is what happens when we don't follow the instructions and we don't help our brother. Okay? It just gets worse, like 7 times worse.
Has to be 7.
Okay, you're doing really well, Mara. No, this is not fair because you haven't seen this.
Just take us down the drain.
Just take us down the drain.
However, the European nations had little money to pay their loans. France tried to get the money by demanding payments from Germany for having started the war. When Germany was unable to pay, France and Belgium occupied Germany's Ruhr Valley. As a result, German miners in the area reduced coal production, and France and Germany moved toward an economic crisis and possible new armed conflict.
It kind of looks like this, you know?
Yeah.
We're just going to shake all the money right out of you. Because we don't really care. I've got to do something here because I decided I'm going to show this to you. Here's where
This is between the two borders.
I haven't, it's up there somewhere.
Where's the doodah thing?
Is it
Anybody
right
see
here?
the little black box? Yes, that's it. Okay. I'll just turn this over.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, just a minute. You're gonna like this. It'll help Tina and me try to get this loan thing paid off here in just a minute. All right, Myra, go ahead one more time.
An international group intervened and negotiated a settlement to the crisis. The group provided a system to save Germany's currency and protect international debts. American bankers agreed to lend money to Germany to pay its war debts to the Allies. And the Allies used the money to pay their debts to the United States.
See how, now what do you see? Now what do you want? This is where the Jews get blamed for everything, right? What do you want to bet that those American bankers were Jewish bankers?
They were.
Because they had the big houses, right? So we're going to undo the money to pay. This is so. Yes, sir.
In reality,
In reality,
the big bankers of the world finance both sides of war.
sure they did.
So it looks like all of this happened, but it's all the big banks just.
I know. I
It's all
know.
part of
I know, but still, they're the only players in the game.
Right, they are, yeah.
They're the only players in the game, so we have to, so I'm
Because
gonna,
we don't play the game.
I'm gonna show you a little, just to help us understand, and to lighten the moment for a minute. There's a Jewish guy. Anybody remember this guy?
Yeah.
This is just gonna, the guy, I'll just let him explain it. It's how you pay back a loan, okay? Who owes who what? This is kind of the predicament that they were in. Oh, no. Wait a minute.
No sound.
Yeah.
Oh, my thing is down here. Just a minute.
My hair. I need a haircut. Hey, I see you got my script. You read it over? No, but Sal was telling me about it. What do you say we put it on a speed and read it over? Want to? Oh, hey, come on. Alan asked me to stop by. Oh, is that the comedy spot? No, Bubblehead, this is a comedy spot. Buddy. Sally. Mel. Rob. Sally. Buddy. Go ahead, Curly, it's your turn. Say Rob. Rob.
The allies.
All right. Now that we've had the roll call, may I hear the comedy spot? Well, I'll tell you, Mel, it's not quite ready for you yet. I'd like to hear it anyway. Well, I don't. You should sit down. All right. Now, actually, this kind of based on an old vaudeville bit, Mel. Buddy, you be the guy who owes, or the ower, and I'll be the guy to whom you owe money or the stuckee. All right?
I'm a big girl because I got long hair.
I'm sorry, Mel. All right.
Oh, George, I don't like to interrupt your whistling, but I happen to be a little short of money, and you owe me $2.
I owe you $2. What for?
Well, remember the other night we went out on a double date?
Yeah.
Well, we went to that expensive nightclub, and the bill was $8. Now, that's $2 apiece, right? I collected from the girls, but you still owe me $2.
It slipped my mind, Bruce. I'll tell you what, I've only got $1. You take this $1, and I'll owe you one.
Right.
Oh, which reminds me, Charlie, you owe me $2.
Me? I owe you $2?
Yes.
What?
I was in the office the other day when your laundry came back.
Oh, did they refuse it?
No, they delivered it. I paid. I gave it to $2.
I'm sorry, but all I have is $1.
Well, I'll take it, but remember, you still owe me $1.
Say, Gwendolyn, it embarrasses me to remind you of this, but you owe me $2.
For what?
For those cosmetics you asked me to pick up at the drugstore.
Well, a debt is a debt, and all I have is this $1. Here, you take it, and I'll owe you $1.
Thank you. Hey, George, here's the $1 you owe me. Now we're all square.
And that's the $1 you owe me, and now we're all square.
And that's the $1 you owe me, and now everybody's square, and I got my $1 back. What do you think, Mel? When you have something, call me.
Give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on. It's all in the. All right, here's Joel's tallest. Here's the tallest building.
Oh.
That's the one in Dubai. Very
In the world?
in the world. Look at these are big buildings. These are big buildings.
That's
Yeah.
great.
They think they're going to be okay.
Tower of
And it was 2,722 feet.
2,722.
2,700?
And the World Trade Center is 1,776 feet tall in remembrance of 1776.
The new one? The
The new one.
The new one, yeah.
Is there anything going on in that? I mean, is there something, are there offices in there, or is it just
Oh, I'm sure
a
apartments.
piece of
I don't know.
cement going up
I
in
don't
there?
know. I don't know. You'd have to have oxygen at that level. I think. All right. At any rate,
Can't
so
pick anybody.
a lot of people criticize President Coolidge and blah blah blah. So at any rate, they said the debts and the new payment plan put foolish pressure on the weak economies, and this is what I'm trying to get to here in just a minute. They said that this made the German currency especially weak, and they warned that a weak economy would lead to serious social problems in Germany and other countries, and that's exactly what it did, right? It's kind of like, there's Mel, you know, there's those guys. Anyway, but the Roaring '20s. America was a happening place. America was a happening place in the 1920s. There was more money being made. It was amazing. did not understand the serious effect that international economic policies could have on the future world of peace. They believed that it was wrong for the Europeans or anyone to borrow money and then refuse to pay it back. And then this is what happened, boom. 1932, the Dow Jones fell to below 40. That was the big crash. Okay, just to give you an idea. First World War, or the Great World War, was a global war originated in Europe that lasted from 1914 to 1918, November 11th. Veterans Day, does that sound familiar? Was it really over? It was World War II because we wouldn't forgive debts to our neighbors. We let a crazy person. Okay, here's the Treaty of Versailles. Treaty of Versailles forced Germany into accepting full blame for World War I. This caused Germany to lose some of its land, forced them to pay for war damages to countries like France and Great Britain. In order to pay, Germany had to print more money, which led to hyperinflation, leading to a depression. Okay, so truce, ceasefire, suspension of hostilities. It's not, but it wasn't over. It was an armistice day. Okay, this is just, we're not going to do this. The bill would have been settled much earlier, but Adolf Hitler reneged on reparations during his reign. So things just started escalating, okay? They're going to have to pay 132 billion pounds? No, Reichsmarks. 22 billion. 19 was 226 billion Reichsmarks. The sum later reduced to 132, but we'll reduce it down to 132, which was 22 billion pounds sterling at the time. That doesn't mean anything to me, but and then Hitler reneges on that, and everybody's just getting mad at everybody.
That just shows the relative inflation of the German Reichmark.
Yeah, Reichmark. It crippled Germany as it tried to shape itself into a democracy. Okay. Anyway, so it led to this, and we know the rest of that. So anyway, bloppity blop. So let's find out about bondservant. I thought that was just I don't know, I hope that wasn't too much of a cul-de-sac, but I just thought that was an interesting piece of history that we know very little about. Did you know about that? How expensive that was and how, okay, one thing leads to another, and Steve, would you please take us through 12 to 18? We'll get there, I promise. We're almost done, actually.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Freeing servants. If any of your people, Hebrew men or women, sell themselves to you and serve you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let them go free. And when you release them, do not send them away empty-handed. Supply them liberally from your stock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Give to them as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. But if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through his earlobe into the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your female servant. Do not consider it hardship to set your servant free, because their service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired man, and the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do.
Okay. So when we think slavery for servants, bond servants, okay, let's just do it this way. You can't acquire a servant for longer than 6 years. Okay? If somebody got so poor that they had to hire themselves out as a bond servant, they're going to come live in your house and they're going to serve you for 6 years. But when the Shemitah year comes, what happens?
They're set free.
They're set free. Okay? They're set free. Okay? But if he says, I really like it here, I like living with you guys, I like taking care of your family and picking up after your dog and whatever, okay? I really like it. He wants to become a bondservant, and you're gonna open up, you're not gonna, okay, I don't know what version you were reading, but he's not gonna take him to the door and nail your ear to the door. You're gonna take him to the door because this is where business is transacted, at the door. And you're gonna get an earring in your ear, okay? And now you're gonna work for them, okay? But he's gonna take care of you. You work for him. You don't just work for him, you're now kind of like part of his family. He's almost like he's adopted you. If he sleeps on a feather bed, you're gonna sleep on a feather bed. I mean, if the owner sleeps on a feather bed, his servant's gonna sleep on a feather bed. It's that kind of thing. He's not gonna be a guy in steerage, okay? And he's worth twice as much than the hired guy who comes and works a limited number of hours and then goes home, because this guy's at your beck and call all day long. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Okay, there's a difference. But in the normal events, if you need to be a bondservant or a servant because you got yourself into trouble, you're going to serve for how many years? Not longer than 6 years. And if he happens to be 2 years before the Shemitah year, how many years are you going to serve? 5, right? See? What if it's 3 years? What if you have to pay this debt? See that you have to be, in a Shemitah cycle, you can only, at the Shemitah, you have to be set free. The debts are forgiven. So you'd be set free to go, right? And if you want to go, he's not just going to say, well, bye, have a nice life. He's supposed to provide you liberally so you can get started again in your new life. Got it?
So that's what Artaxerxes did.
Exactly.
Let Ezra and Nehemiah go back. He gave them all the supplies.
He gave them all the stuff.
Esther was sitting right there.
Esther was sitting right there, reminding him of the Shemitah, the Jubilee. That's exactly right. Does anybody not understand that? Okay. Slaves were not distinguishable from anybody else by race, speech, or clothing. They looked and lived like everyone else and were never segregated off from the rest of society in any way. Many times they held high managerial positions. Think Joseph. Think Daniel. Okay. Slaves were employees or servants with a financial contract that lasted no longer than 6 years. Okay, this is really important. Psalm 40 in verse 6 says, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have opened. When you become a servant, a bondservant of God, he opens your ears so you can hear him. Okay? We are bondservants of his. Do we want to leave, Tina? No. We do not want to leave. Is he going to take care of us then? Are we his responsibility? Yes. He's responsible for us if we become a bondservant of his. And no, we don't want to. I don't want to leave. Who in their right mind wants to say, after 6 years, wants to say, okay, Jesus, that's enough? That would be crazy, right? Okay. The opening of the ear is an allusion to the piercing of the ear of the servant, as mentioned in chapter 15, verse 17. Steve just read to us. Yet when this prophecy is quoted in the New Testament and applied to Yeshua, the opening of the ear takes on a new meaning. Let's see what it takes on. Watch this. Oops. The ear thing is left out here. He quotes the very same words. Hebrews 10:5 says, sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. Yeshua came in a body that was prepared to be a sacrifice. Right? It was prepared to be a sacrifice. Behold, I've come to do your will, O God, and it is written of me in the scroll of the book. Okay. In place of my ears you have opened, we read, a body you have prepared for me. God is teaching us something. The opening or piercing of an ear is an act of voluntary surrender to full servitude. And that's exactly what Yeshua did when he came here. It was an act of surrender in this body that was prepared for him to come and to be a sacrifice for Tina's sins. He took on a body that had been prepared for him. It was a supreme act of servitude, right? He came to do the will of his Father. It was to be the sacrifice. Philippians 2:7-8. But he made himself no reputation, took upon himself the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death on the cross. But in between coming in the flesh and returning to the Father, he had a lot to say to his sheep about being the door. Remember? He had to go to the door and have your ear open. He went, well, Yeshua said, guess what? He was the door. He's the door that we go to. He's the door that we go through. John 10:7 says, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep, and all whoever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and go in and go out and find pasture. Shed a little light on that. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying. Okay? If you're listening, Shema, and your ears are opened up, then you are a servant of Yeshua. He nailed the list of allegations against you. He nailed that to the wood of the cross, right? To the door. He is the door. You're an employee, an ambassador, and a representative, a fellow worker, a family member. And taking care of those around you is a big part of Shema, is a big part of hearing. Because Shema is listen, hear, and do, right? Hear and do. Hear and do. It's having your ears open to who Yeshua is and what he expects us to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? No? Yes?
Yes, yes.
All right. Hearing has to do with obedience. The mark of our willing servitude to the Almighty is our obedience to his commandments. And we keep hearing this in the book of Revelation, which we're working on. If we hear, we obey. Here's the 7 churches. Hear with Shema. Hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who has an ear, let him hear. He who is open-eared, let him hear. And if you haven't, if you have an open ear, right, and you have an eye that's full of light, you're going to be generous, and we're going to hear, and we're going to be a servant of God, and he's going to take care of us. We're going to be his employee. Do you ever think of yourself as an employee of Jesus? No. I don't either. I think we should start seeing ourselves that way. Right? We work for him. And he takes care of us. Okay. All right. Blah, blah, blah. All right. 19 to 23. Steve, real quick.
Not real quick.
Not real quick? Okay.
All right, I'm almost there.
All right.
Okay, 19 through 23?
Yeah.
Okay. Set apart for the Lord your God every firstborn male of your herds and flocks. Do not put the firstborn of your cows to work, and do not shear the firstborn of your sheep. Each year you and your family are to eat them in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose. If an animal has a defect, is lame or blind, or has any serious flaw, you must not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. You are to eat it in your own towns. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat it, as if it were gazelle or deer. But you must not eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water.
Okay. This is just the firstborn of the flock is belongs to the Lord, and Yeshua is the firstborn among many brethren, and he had absolutely no defect in him or blemish in him, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's enough said on that. If it does have, if in your flock the firstborn does have a defect on it, don't offer it to the Lord. Go ahead and have it Tuesday night for supper, okay? But don't offer it to the Lord. Just don't eat the blood, right? Okay. And 16, 1 through 8, and we'll just call it a day right there, I think. 16, 1 through 8. Yes, I'm sorry.
Before we get away from this discussion of money, I don't know much about the Bible and about what it says about money, other than neither a borrower nor a lender be. So, but in the stuff that we just read, there was a lot of reference to loans and stuff. So what's the ideal here?
Well, neither a borrower nor lender be is probably something out of Proverbs. And we're talking about going through the covenant. This is the covenant thing, because there's always gonna be people, your brother-in-law is always gonna need to borrow something, or your, you know, your cousin Millie or something like that.
Shouldn't you just be gifting it instead of lending it?
Well, you should never say no. You should never close your hand and say no. Right? Yep.
Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God, because in the month of Aviv he brought you out of Egypt by night. Sacrifice as the Passover to the Lord your God an animal from your flock or herd in the place the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. Do not eat it with the bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, so that all the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. Let no yeast be found in your possession in all your land for 7 days. Do not let any of the meat you sacrifice on the evening of the first day remain until morning. You must not sacrifice the Passover in any town the Lord your God gives you, except the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. There you must sacrifice the Passover in the evening, when the sun goes down, on the anniversary of your departure from Egypt. Roast it and eat it at the place the Lord your God will choose. Then in the morning return to your tents. For 6 days eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day hold an assembly to the Lord your God and do no work.
Okay. So this book of Deuteronomy is known as what? The
Second giving of the law.
Right, and it's the covenant. This is our copy of the covenant that we have with him, and he's now going into the feast days. Okay, and he expects his people to keep the Passover. Okay, and do we sacrifice the lamb now? No, we're keeping a dinner now, and we're participating in the week of unleavened bread, right? Because it's a memorial to him for what he did, because Yeshua was the Passover lamb, and he was taken to the place. It didn't happen in Poughkeepsie, and it didn't happen in San Francisco or Portland, Oregon. It happened in Jerusalem, which was the place that God chose to have the sacrifice, the Passover lamb, and for Yeshua to be put on the cross. That was his choice. And I have this underlined about 4 different times, in the place that God chooses to make his name abide. The place that God chooses, the place that God chooses. Only do this in the place that God chooses, okay? Well, all of us people from Holland, the Dutch people, we were all gone by then. We were Caucasian way by then, okay? We've been gone for 800 years. Judah was the only guys that were still stuck around, okay? Judah did exactly what they were supposed to do, didn't they? Think about this. Judah did exactly what they were supposed to do. They took the sacrifice, the Lamb of God, that was the Passover lamb, to the place that God chose to make his Passover sacrifice for the whole world. Judah did that. We can't be mad at Judah for doing that. If they hadn't have done that, Jesus wasn't just going to walk into town and say, okay, well, I'm here to pay for all your sins, and I'm just going to go out and lay down. No, there had to be the whole process, right? And Judah brought him. That was their job, in a way, to flip the coin over to the other side. Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're going to leave it right there. We'll finish it up next week. Except.
Sorry, Maria.
Oh, sorry, Maria. Except, wait a minute. Don't anybody go anywhere.
Don't go.
Don't go anywhere, just a minute. Everybody turn to Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54. And 2 through 8. And Bill, you stop copying, so can you read this? 2 through 8. This is the half-tour portion.
Okay, let's see here.
It's on page 1033.
1033.
Yeah, there you go.
And I got
That's too far.
got stuff in my book here. Isaiah 53,
54.
54. I'll get there.
What verses?
2 through 8.
54. What verses?
2 through 8.
2 through 8. Enlarge the place of your tent, and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. Do not spare, lengthen your cords, and strengthen your stakes. For you shall expand to the right and to the left, and your descendants will inherit nations, and make desolate cities inhabited. Do not fear, for you will not be ashamed, neither be disgraced, for you will not be put to shame. For you will forget the shame of your youth, and will not remember the reproach of your widowhood anymore. For your Maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. He is called the God of the whole earth. For the Lord has called you, like a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, like a youthful wife when you were refused, says your God. For a mere moment I have forsaken you, but with the great mercies I will gather you. With a little wrath I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I will have mercy on you, says the Lord your Redeemer.
Isn't that good news? He just incorporated stuff from Ruth and Boaz and from Hosea. He called his people back to himself, even though they had been unfaithful to him, like Hosea. From a burdened, broken-hearted wife to a new bride whose relationship with her husband is unstained. That's what he's doing to his people today. He's calling his people back. It's kind of like, you know, it's a good thing we're not God, because if we were God, we would just go, you know, throw them out with the trash, throw us out with the trash if we were God. No.
Strike three, you're out.
You're out. You're out of here. I'm just not going to do this anymore. No. He loves his people, and he understands how difficult this is to be a human being in a body of flesh, which is why he came in a body prepared for all of this, right? And he just wants us to open up our ears so we can hear his message, and he loves us. Is that too difficult to understand?
No,
Please.
it's not difficult.
It's not difficult.
It's just hard to take yes for an answer.
It's hard to take yes for an answer. We do not want to be people who cannot take yes for an answer. He loves us. He's waiting for us. He wants to walk with you. Tina, that's all he wants to do is just walk with you. And why not? Who wouldn't want to serve a God like that, right? And where's Jeff?
He's out of town this week.
Jeff is out of town this week. I didn't know that. He forgot to tell me. Do you want to do the Aaronic blessing, and then Steve, would you close us up with prayer? Thank you. Is it chilly? We need to fix that.
Yivarekeka Yahuwah v'yishmarecha. Er Yahuwah panav elecha v'yikuneka. Yisa Yahuwah panav elecha v'yasemecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his everlasting peace and harmony in every area of your life.
Heavenly Father, we come to you as this small group of believers that you are God and that you are our God. We ask you to bless your word, to write it on our hearts, to get rid of evil in our thoughts, our minds, our hearts, our city, our state, our country, our world. and break down the evil. We know that the evil one is in our presence, but you have promised us that we can defeat through your help. We ask you that you bless our group and that you open up our ears to hear the word and burn it in our hearts. We pray for each individual here, each individual need. We all have different needs. You know what they are. And I ask in your name that you will touch our hearts and give us the peace that you have promised us. And now, bless this food that we're going to share. Give us nourishment and strength. And give us a wonderful, beautiful, glorious Colorado day. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.